So when I was growing up, I had a very firm, I thought, idea of what art was. And art was, to me, the ability to think of something and then draw it. And I was not good at art. So instead, I did other things growing up. I did theater, I was involved in a lot of creative things, but I never really took any art classes until the second semester of my senior year of high school. And my teacher at the time, Mr. Smith, he was a very stern Mormon man, and he only said two nice things to me the whole time I took the class. The first nice thing he said to me is that I was a tiny golden nugget of potential. So this is me. So I took that to heart, and I decided to spend all of my time in the art room. So this is a piece that I made in high school. It's made with mainly ink and watercolor. And for me, this represents the beginning of my artistic process, where I was willing to take all my extra time, sit in the art room by myself with a piece of paper, and then just pour out onto that piece of paper. And you might be able to tell I didn't have the best time in high school. Little bit of a dark painting, but that's okay. I ended up graduating, which was really good. The second nice thing that Mr. Smith ever told me was that I should consider taking some art classes in college. So I listened to that and then promptly decided to be an international studies major. So I went through a lot of changes. I moved to Denver. I'm from California, so I came here to go to DU. I was an international studies student, but I was not having a good time. So I ended up withdrawing from school and making a lot of personal changes. One of those personal changes that I made was actually the decision to transition gender from female to male. And that really impacted a lot of the way I thought about myself and the world that I was surrounded by. I also decided that screw international studies, I was going to listen to Mr. Smith for once and take some art classes. So I took this class called Concepts with Cheen Wong, and this class was extremely pivotal in my artistic direction. This is a piece that I made for the class, but also really for myself. And when I went into making this piece, I was at a point in my life where I was about to have surgery, top surgery to have my breast removed. And it hit me, there was a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, my body is not going to be like this for much longer. I only have a very temporary amount of time where I can use my body to actually communicate something. And Cheen introduced the idea of using art as a language, that you could communicate things that maybe words didn't totally explain. And for me, words never really totally explained how I felt. So I created this piece to kind of talk about how I felt about the autonomy of my body in the context of society, etc. But also, I really wanted a document or a history of what I had been through and how I felt. Because I don't want to feel crucified for the rest of my life, but I also don't want to forget who I am and where I come from and how that plays into who I am today. So this was an important piece because I don't see this as a self-portrait. This is not how I look today. But this is how I was at a certain point. And so it exists as a historical document, so I can move forward without feeling like I'm losing any sense of my identity or forgetting where I came from. I've also used the medium of printmaking to explore this idea of my personal history and appearance. Through the transition, my appearance changed very rapidly, so I felt like I'd wake up one day and look like a completely different person. And so art was a really good way for me to connect with myself and remember where I came from while still moving forward. The other really, really important thing that I learned from Cheen in that concepts class is to constantly look for other artists as inspiration. And this is a large painting in acrylic done by my favorite artist, Yayoi Kusama, who I found while researching for this conceptual art class. Yayoi Kusama is a Japanese artist. She was born in the 1920s, so really old school. But her works are very complicated and abstract representations of her mind and her hallucinations almost. As an offset, or an off point, Yayoi Kusama is the largest grossing female artist to this date, dollar-wise. So that was really cool to me, to see that you don't have to necessarily draw things from your imagination literally to be successful as an artist. So I started incorporating this obsessive nature of drawing into my everyday life. I consider myself a very anxious person. I'm very high-strung. If I think of one idea, it's all of a sudden wrapped up in a big yarn ball. So focusing my time into these images really allowed me to manifest those anxieties in a tangible, physical way, a way that I felt was productive. And also, when I make these drawings, eventually I get tunnel vision. So I'm like in this completely separate world where my anxieties aren't anxieties anymore. They're now lines and images and things I can deal with. So this is all good and stuff, but where do I go with it next? I've recently been trying to incorporate influences and direct these patterns and practices into a more succinct form. So this summer, I went to the Denver Rock and Mineral Show, and the theme was agates, and they're these rocks that have these very intricate patterns that repeat in all sorts of different ways, and I was fascinated. I was like, oh my gosh, a new thing for me to play with. So I started incorporating those things into my doodle practices, and then I took that on into other classes to make finished pieces. So this is a print, and let me tell you, I love printmaking. I love printmaking because that room is as much of a tunnel as my brain is. And once you step in there, time disappears. It's literally the most tedious, obsessive, repetitive process. I couldn't think of a better way to mimic the craziness of my mind. So this piece right here is an etching. It was made by making 3 different plates and printing them on top of each other in different colors. And I really enjoyed the ability to practice with subtleties in color and kind of expand on this obsessive practice that I'm so wrapped up in all the time. So these pieces were inspired by those agates. This piece is a woodcut that I made a couple years ago in 2013 actually. It vaguely represents a landscape to me at least, but what it represents more is the obsessive amount of time I spent carving into a block of wood. Because if you think that every single mark there was made physically into a block of wood, it kind of shows the way that I'm always thinking and making art in that way. This is a screen print that I made. The assignment was to create a personal mandala. And this is actually 30 inches by 40 inches and printed on 24 pieces of paper. And one of these squares is one piece of paper. So I started with one square, and then just like my mind kind of proliferates, it exploded into this large piece, and I think that's very representative of my art making practice. Looking forward, and the things that I've been doing recently as well, is trying to channel these into other directed paths. So in the spring, I did an independent study with Scott Montgomery in association with the Visual Trips show that's in the gallery right now. And I designed these posters to advertise the show. And I worked with Scott and did a lot of research into the psychedelic poster movement and the styles and the underlying themes. And then it was a really good practice to manifest this into a piece, which also reflects my personal styles, in this area especially. So that was a really good practice for me. In December, hopefully, fingers crossed, I will be traveling to Steamboat Springs to work with Sue Omi. She runs a print studio up there called Omi Graphics, and hopefully I'll be interning there. And Sue has a lot of alternative printmaking processes and just a lot of valuable influence over there. And I really like to incorporate all that into my art. Although he is not sitting in this room today, I would hope that if Mr. Smith were here, he would raise his hand and told me that I've grown into a golden nugget this tiny size. And though I cannot make a living off of this golden nugget so far, hopefully after grad school and progressing into my future one day, I will be able to. So, thank you.
Questions, Matthew?
What kind of experimental processes do you hope to learn from Sue, and how do you see yourself merging your kind of obsessive doodling into those more experimental processes?
Sure. Well, recently I've begun to think of printmaking as a way of getting ink to stick to something, like that simply, to stick to something and then transfer. So one of the processes that I actually learned from a workshop with Sue is called carborundum, and it uses a gel medium and sandpaper grit to create that stickiness for the ink to stick to. but even things like, who knows, just alternative materials, I'm hoping to learn. And to incorporate it, I think that, I guess even just the learning and the obsessive trying and trying again. I mean, with printmaking, nothing ever works the first time. So I think that automatically when I'm working in there, it'll all just kind of come together with the process. Yeah.
I love hearing that somebody loves printmaking. There's something that is, I don't know how to really describe it yet, but when you talked about the nugget and the agates and the solidity of these gems and geology, it seems like there's something about that that may serve as a grounding for you, or it may serve as something that you can jump into further as something to balance some of that freneticness that you tend to have. And I'm not sure how to describe it, but it was like there's something in the repetition of those influences that could be really interesting for you. Maybe going to the Museum of Nature and Science and seeing, I mean, it just seems like there's something there.
Yeah.
And even extending on from that, there's something about several of those images that, in addition to having like the striation of the different mineral deposits and everything, there's also the topographical quality to them, which takes it out to like even a larger map, type thing as far as geography and things like that.
I've recently become obsessed with Google Maps, and I think it's also something about like these lines in my head being reinforced by lines that exist in nature and are there solidly, have been created by history, that almost physically grounds and connects me to the real world, I guess. So yeah.
I just add to Catherine and Eric's comments about geology. Metamorphism seems to be, a theme in your life.
Yeah.
And it also comes through in some of the art, the geology that you're attracted to. Is that a theme that you're aware of, or?
I hadn't actually thought of it in those terms until that's a great word, metamorphosis. I'd always connected it to, I guess, like the creation of my identity, like turning something in the air into a physical object that represents me, whether it's my thoughts or something physical. But metamorphosis is a really good word. I think about that. Thank you.
Thanks so much.